was a young pastor, I spent 5 years as a special assistant to Dr. Charles Stanley at the First Baptist Church of Atlanta, Georgia. It was a wonderful time in my life. 14,000 people came every Sunday. My sole responsibility during that time was to preach when he was away. One day, Dr. Stanley called the leadership of our church together. He was very excited. He said that he had discovered something in the book of Jeremiah that had awakened him, and he wanted us to be awakened as well. Dr. Stanley alerted us to 8 simple reasons why God judges a nation. All 8 are found in the first 8 chapters of Jeremiah. Now, it's important to note that these are not 8 reasons why God might judge a nation. These are not 8 reasons why God even ought to judge a nation. These are 8 reasons why God has already done it. The parallels with today are obvious. Number 1, the people had forgotten God and no longer feared Him as God. Number 2, people had become skilled at evil, at wrong, expert at sin, and could no longer do good. Number 3, there was an inability to feel shame and embarrassment. They could no longer blush. Number 4, there was a sexual epidemic leading to a divorce crisis in the culture. Number 5, there was spiritual confusion that led to what Jeremiah called the abandonment of the ancient paths. Number 6, greed, manipulation, deceit dominated the economy and controlled financial decision-making. Number 7, there was a hardness of heart that permeated the society. And number 8, spiritual leaders abandoned their role of responsibility, compromised their message, refused to teach truth. And Jeremiah said, "My people love to have it so." It is very apparent, based on biblical evidence, that we stand indicted by this righteous judge. This judge who has already judged nations in the past for these very reasons. But we are not yet convicted. There is a window of hope, but we need an advocate, someone to represent us with this judge. In 1 Kings chapter 18, there is an example of advocacy. Elijah was an advocate in his generation, an advocate for God. You remember the famous contest on Mount Carmel, when Elijah challenged the establishment, when he confronted the culture and demanded a decision. God miraculously intervened. The people decided for God and godly principles, and judgment was averted. The advocacy of Elijah worked. Elijah was a man of God. He was a man of courage, a man of conviction, but he was also a man of action. Now, the history of the United States is filled with pastors who were passionate not only about the gospel, but about American principles of freedom, opportunity, and independence. John Adams, the second American president, said that one of the critical reasons for the success of the American Revolution was that the pulpits thundered. Numerous pastors were engaged in their local state assemblies in the development of constitutional government. A prime example is the Reverend John Craighead. Craighead was well known for his passionate preaching of the gospel of Christ, but he was equally known for his commitment to the revolution. One of his contemporaries said of Craighead that he would preach and fight alternatively. Many decades later, in England, God raised up another remarkable leader, Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, was not only enormously influential in his native England, but he was read regularly by the pastors of America. Spurgeon once said in a sermon at the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London, "You say, do not bring religion into politics, but I say that is precisely where it ought to be brought and placed as before the face of all men on a candlestick." Dr. Dan Bebbington, senior lecturer in history at the University of Stirling in Scotland, is a Spurgeon scholar. And he writes that Spurgeon was, quote, "a political force," unquote. He says that Spurgeon, in his lectures and public appearances, repeatedly brought a biblical perspective on social, political, economic, and moral issues. Spurgeon once commented on the rise of socialism, which of course later morphed into communism. Spurgeon in a lecture said this. He said, "We must beware of German socialism because it may yet pollute the masses of mankind and lead to the overthrow of society." David Aikman, in his book From Delusion to Disbelief, tells the story of Friedrich Engels, the wealthy supporter of Karl Marx and the man many historians credit as a major contributor to the writing of the Communist Manifesto. Engels stayed late one night to play a Victorian parlor game with the eldest Marx daughter. The popular game called Confessions had one object. You were supposed to give a confession in answer to a surprise question. At one point of the game, the eldest Marx daughter asked Engels, "Who do you hate most in all of England?" And Engels instantly replied, "Spurgeon." Spurgeon was a power for God and a force for good. He saw no contradiction between spiritual and public influence. He was an advocate for his generation. We in America are at a Jeremiah moment of impending judgment, but we have an Elijah opportunity. We need advocates. We need you to be an advocate. Jesus said in Matthew 5 that we are to be salt of the earth and light of the world. God says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land." This is a most urgent moment in American history. We need advocates. Some time ago, I had a private meeting with David Barton, the well-known Christian historian. Barton told me that recently he commissioned George Barna, the pollster, to do a special survey of parishioners in numerous churches. The question was, what do you most want your pastor to preach on from the pulpit? 91% of those responding said they wanted biblical leadership on abortion. They wanted to make right biblical decisions. 86% said they wanted information on religious liberty and freedom. 85% said, "Please train us, teach us how to change the culture, how to redeem society for Christ." And 83% said, "Clarify biblical teaching on sexual identity." Now that reveals that the parishioners in your churches are hungry for spiritual leadership. They want biblical direction. This is your opportunity to give them that guidance and make a powerful impact on their influence in their societies. Now, in this moment in American history, this is a time of great decision. This is a Jeremiah moment, but we have an Elijah opportunity. The evidence has already been presented. The indictment has already been delivered, but the conviction, the judgment has not yet been rendered. We have a moment of hope. Will you be an Elijah? Will you be a man of God, of conviction, of courage, of action? Will you be involved in your culture, in your society? Will you be an Elijah? Will you be our advocate?
Go to ChooseGreatness.com today and join the fight. Give us your email, and we will send you a free downloadable action pack that will provide simple and effective steps you can use now to make a difference. We can win. Join the movement for godly greatness today. Go to ChooseGreatness.com.